G'day everybody, Garrick here from Studio One Vintage Guitars, joined today by David Ward, musician. We're here to do In the Groove this week and we're shaking things up a little bit. Proudly brought to you in conjunction with onvinyl.co.nz. Today we're going to be doing a bit of a panel discussion around Robert Johnson's King of the Delta Blues Singers. This has been described as one of the most influential albums of all time. It influenced a whole raft of musicians through the 60s and beyond. David is a musician. He knows a thing or two about guitars. He's also my guitar teacher. He's a multi-talented instrumentalist, a composer of sorts, and a really good guy. So what we thought we'd do is we just have a little bit of a chat about this album. We actually sat down together last week in my guitar lesson, and I was doing a bit of prep for the show, and I thought, look, let's have a chat about the album and you know, maybe I can get some ideas. And it was that chat that really inspired me to think, hey, let's change things up and bring somebody along into the show who kind of knows a little bit more than I do about stuff. When we listened to this the other day, what was your first impression about it? I remember you saying something along the lines of it being like, you know, it all sounds a little bit familiar these days, but at its time it would have been like super revolutionary.
Yeah, I possibly might have said that. I guess revolutionary in the sense, like, it's not like he took all those elements that were around him at the time, like of the folk blues and the ragtime and the sort of the early jazz, and the way that he put it together in such a kind of like personal, kind of powerful, kind of like, well, basically kind of perfect kind of form.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that like people are still like nearly 100 years later sort of going back to those recordings as a source of inspiration and trying to mine that for the gold that's in there, sort of tells you that it was kind of like he just was one of those seminal kind of musicians that kind of like a people still go back and listen to Bach, or they go back and listen to Charlie Parker.
Absolutely.
And they're like, what can I get from this? You know, like it.
And of course, so the recordings were actually made. Robert Johnson, you know, he's a really mysterious character. There's a lot of myth around him. You know, that he disappeared. He sold his soul to the devil at the Crossroads in exchange for being able to play the guitar really well. And you know, there's some truth around some of this kind of stuff that builds up the myth, in that he wasn't a very good guitar player. He was hanging around some of the juke joints with the likes of Son House, who kind of said, oh, you know, he was pretty average, stop playing that music, you're hurting everybody's ears. And Robert Johnson disappeared, and he disappeared for, you know, potentially a couple of years. And when he came back, he was this amazing guitar player. And what actually transpired had happened was he'd gone and found a guitar teacher, Ike somebody, can't remember the name of the Zimmerman, something like that, yeah. And he'd lived with this guy and spent basically 2 years just working on his craft and learning and becoming student to master. And the crazy thing is that they would go across the road late at night and play in a graveyard, because they were obviously not wanting to wake up all the locals. So they'd go across the road and they'd play like at midnight on a couple of tombstones facing each other. And so there's this that's helped create part of the sense of myth around, you know, Robert Johnson. On top of that, a lot of his songs tend to deal with things like, you know, the devil and kind of all these kind of dark themes. There's a lot of darkness to his music that comes out. So anyway, he comes back and he's an amazing guitar player and musician. He's playing on street corners, he's playing in juke joints, and I'm guessing in the early 30s, but it's not until 1936 and 37, over a couple of recording sessions, that these songs are recorded. And they're recorded, I think he recorded a total of only 27 tracks. They were released on 12 inches at the time, or rather 78 RPM, 10 inches. And this album, though, didn't come out until 1961. And I think that was at a really pivotal time in, you know, the changing musical landscape, and when particularly the likes of your UK rock blues scene is really emerging out at that time and looking for some inspiration, and it just feels that there's a little bit of right place, right time stuff going on for when this album was actually released. Eric Clapton's heavily influenced, the Stones are heavily influenced, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, all of these guys are turning to this for inspiration. And when
that was part of that kind of in the 60s, that real folk blues revival, where they were kind of trying to go back and go, where are the really authentic sources of this music that we're becoming obsessed with? And so they dig up these, they'd go back and they'd dig up Roscoe Holcomb, like banjo player, and they'd put him on stage and re-record him. And obviously they couldn't do that with Robert Johnson, but they re-released
this. And so Mississippi John Hurt playing at Newport. You've got Muddy Waters playing at Newport. Muddy Waters releasing Folk Singer in 1964, which is the album we're going to cover next week. They tracked down Son House, who had released a little bit of material in the late 20s. He recorded, I think, in 1946 an album which was, he hadn't played guitar for 16 years, but there was just such demand for this authentic kind of folk or traditional country blues sound that had been driven a lot, I guess, by young urban white folk in a way, with the Bob Dylans and and that folk movement of the 60s. And of course then you've got, this British blues explosion, which we're going to cover in week 3 of this little series on the blues, where Eric Clapton, you look at Cream, you look at Led Zeppelin, a lot of these songs have been covered, extensively. And when you hear Clapton talking about Robert Johnson, he said you could spend a lifetime trying to master the way that he plays. There's so much intricacy in what he does. And I think that's quite hard to hear the first few times around. You don't really appreciate it. Like I remember in my younger days being really into Cream and really into Led Zeppelin and listening to a bit of Robert Johnson and going, what's that scratchy old kind of, stuff, that's, it is what it is. Yeah. But really, as part of this project, I've spent a lot of time listening to this, and it really gets under your skin when you really pay attention and when you really listen to some of the finer details that are going in there. It's just, a lot going on.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Because talking about this stuff, I guess in terms of the theory or the kind of intellectual side of it, it's kind of it's in some ways it's quite simple music.
Yeah.
But then there's that kind of I know one of my teachers was I think it's a Miles Davis quote. It was it's not like a what, it's like a how. And, and with this, you if you really try and sort of assimilate and sort of embody the kind of the rhythm and the articulation and the kind of the attitude of this, you just can keep on coming back to it
that's right,
like a source that just keeps on giving,
And of course we've had 80, 90 years now of blues-driven music, of 12-bar blues, of hearing the blues shuffle, of hearing all of this stuff. But, this is the source material for that. And that's, this is really the not just this, but a whole raft of other music that also influenced Robert Johnson. And I think you can't just look at Robert Johnson in isolation. You've got to look at all, you've got to look at the Muddy Waters, the Charlie Pattons, the Skip James, Lead Belly, all of this kind of stuff was kind of really amazing source and inspirational material for stuff that came out in the 60s, for Hendrix, for a whole lot of stuff that kind of came on from there. We talk about Johnson's guitar style being, pretty complex, where he's combining sometimes a blues shuffle with straight time simultaneously, which is a pretty challenging feat. I think we talked about that the other week. We were saying, a blues shuffle that which is the front and back of the triplet, right? Yeah, and it's been put out there that he was actually one of the very first, if not the first, to put that blues shuffle down, recorded on the guitar. I've heard earlier piano recordings of that shuffle, but it's it's that first and third beat of the triplet that combine to make that. So there's examples in his music where he's playing that blues shuffle, but at the same time, where he's playing that down there with his thumb. At the same time, he's playing a little straight timing licks over the top on slide.
Yeah, I love it when he does that, because it has that real tension between, Yeah, he's kind of hinting at almost like a double time kind of thing. He's doing the swing,
Yeah.
which is like you say, the triplet, and then
Yeah.
da 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 da, sort of hinting at that sort of 16th note thing, and it just has this great kind of pull, kind of like, you know, like that kind of in the blues, that kind of like the minor major thirds, just going back and forth between that, the swing and the straight and the major and the minor. It just has this kind of doesn't really settle, and it and it grooves like hell. And it's kind of quite, like that kind of thing. You really have to, like, I often get my students to kind of be able to kind of move between those kind of like subdivisions, so that either, you know, like you can feel those in your body, because it's like to make it. There's like, once again, you can sort of talk about it, but then to be able to express it on your instrument is another thing. Yeah.
So from a musician's perspective, how difficult is it to maintain that kind of rhythmic complexity and make it sort of sound seamless?
Well, I guess just like it, in my what I was just saying was, like, for it to be seamless, it just needs to be really like held in the body, you know.
Yeah.
You've got to have that like really deep sense of kind of where the pulse is, so that you can play off the pulse. And like for him, it doesn't seem like, you know, some other kind of maybe rhythmically complex music. It seems like it's like a little bit of almost like a little intellectual exercise, you know. It's like it's not like prog rock. It's like, but you know, like it's something that's like deeply felt, and it feels great.
That's right.
And because he's kind of expressing it through his body, and the way that he kind of moves between his like vocal phrasing, you know, and the really sort of slippery kind of phrasing with his voice, to these really straight rhythms on the guitar and back and forth. It's just like, it's obvious that he's kind of, you know, he's feeling these rhythms kind of really naturally.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do it, there needs to be kind of.
And there's a lot of rhythm in the voice as well as that kind of that huge range between falsetto and sort of almost like a baritone just going on all the time. And the timing is not, you know, it's all over the show. It's not just 4/4. It's like there's extra beats here and beats taken out here, and you know, it's not like we're sitting there going 12-bar blues. Here's every 4 beats in the bar, and it's all the same. It's all about, I guess, feeling, or however he's feeling at the time, or just the structure of the song that he's created, right?
Well, often on these like early blues recording, I mean, there was kind of basically like a general kind of 12-bar form in this kind of music, but then it seems to be much more based around the vocal, and whether it needs to breathe more, or sometimes they'll just cut off a beat, or sometimes they'll stretch it. You know, and it feels kind of totally natural until you go to play it and you realise that, you know, that this. It doesn't. It's actually more idiosyncratic than you think, and that's because he's seamlessly just going between his voice and guitar in a way that's kind of sort of natural, right?
Yeah, that's right. And he's often sort of associated with you know, playing these kind of these guitars with the thumb picking going on and then the slide. But one thing that I found really interesting is there's been, when they say that Robert Johnson was poisoned to death, right, by a jilted lover's partner. There's also a theory that he actually had a long-term disease, and one of the symptoms of that disease is really lanky features. And of the 3 known photographs of Robert Johnson, there's only 3 known. He's got these enormously long fingers, right? So is there something super anatomical going on that's helping him to play this guitar in an extraordinary way? You know, we'll never know, and we'll never know was he poisoned, or did he die from this, you know, this mystery illness that had been plaguing him for some time.
I saw sort of like some interviews with some of his kind of contemporaries, and talking about, you know, because they were trying to do what he was doing, and they could get it, but it was a real effort, you know. So they were talking about he was just a bit of a physical kind of freak in terms of what he was able to reach with his kind of fingers.
Yeah, and I mean, he's often playing those, you know, I've seen some of the things where he's playing that long A with the pinky up here on the 5th fret, barring the rest of the A chord. But then, you know, when he's playing these descending lines, he's still holding fingers down here. It's complicated stuff. So just pretty amazing. He's sort of known to have. He's been associated with the Gibson L1 because in one of these 3 photographs, he's sitting there holding an L1. He's got a thumb pick on. There's a capo on, I think, on the 2nd or 3rd fret. And we've got a Gibson, beautiful period authentic Gibson L2 here today. But it's been also suggested that was perhaps like a prop for the photo shoot, and that he might have actually played something a little bit more modest in real life, maybe a Stella, which was a very common guitar of the era. And so again, we'll never really know what guitar he actually played throughout his career, or guitars.
I heard that I was watching a documentary, and one of his travelling companions, who they're travelling around the States, playing everywhere, and then the place where they had the guitars stored for the day burnt down,
right.
And they didn't have any guitars.
Yeah.
And so they went for they just walked along the highway, and Robert Johnson had a harmonica, and the other guy had never heard him play a harmonica, and he played it amazingly and stopped traffic, and there was the police had to come and kind of direct traffic, and they made enough money to immediately go to the next town, just buy another couple of guitars. So
because he really was just travelling around, just constantly on the move. I think they said they'd play a show, and they'd just they'd get home, get into their motel bed or hotel bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they might just get up the next morning. They're straight on the train. He didn't know where he was going, what he was doing, and this he was just off. And you can imagine, I don't think he probably would have had much of a guitar case. He's probably just carrying his guitar around, over his shoulder. I doubt he probably had a case carrying it around. Probably went through a few guitars over the years, right? Goodness knows what happened. They smashed up or what. But they would have also played. There's something crazy that I've been really struggling to understand a lot about the tone that comes out of these guitar recordings, being almost really piano-like. Not a lot of sustain, very, very succinct in the way that the notes are played, and I'm guessing that a lot of that is to do with extremely dead strings, probably really, really old strings, right? Because I can't imagine that, like us in the modern era, we're buying and changing strings every week, or to get that bright, fresh tone all the time, right? These guys would have been getting the absolute maximum lifespan out of strings that they could, and repairing them when they broke, and all that kind of stuff. But there is this really unusual tone. Another part of that might be the fact that a lot of people say that his recordings were sped up, and you can kind of understand why they say that. His singing is quite high pitched. The guitars are tuned up. He's often playing what in modern terms would look like an open tuning, G tuning, but perhaps capered up on the 3rd or 4th fret, which seems unusually high. And they're saying some of these slide bits on a 12 fret body joint would be up here in the 14th, 15th fret, which is an economical type playing. And so they've made these suppositions that all the recordings have been sped up, and then they'll go so far as to slow the recordings down. And when you actually listen to the slowed down recordings, they sound a little bit more like some of the other blues singers of that period, and you go, that sounds pretty good. But I did a bit of reading back and forth on this, and I think I kind of finally settled on the fact that no, they weren't sped up. That in fact, because you would have had to 3 recording sessions over 2 years, every single recording sped up to the same thing, just doesn't marry up. But what may have been the case, that he may have actually tuned his guitar rather than to open G. He might have tuned it up another whole step up to open A, and instead of capoing on the 4th fret, capoed on the 2nd. And a benefit of that is that you get a whole lot of extra tension in the strings and rigidity for your slide playing. Right. And for your the tone that comes out, it kind of marries with what I'm hearing in that really chunky kind of tone that you kind of hear. That's my thing. That's
an interesting, deep nerdy dive. That's great.
Yeah, but that's kind of the reading, where I got to on the reading I was doing on that.
There was, and something that I saw, in the first recording that he did in 1936 or whatever, he kind of had quite an idea about how he wanted to record it. So he actually set up the mic sort of quite close to the wall, and he was kind of bouncing his sound off the sort of a hotel wall. Yeah. And so that sort of gave it sort of that quite kind of bright kind of sound that you kind of hear in the recording. I mean, that's also part of the myth too, that he was kind of that he never wanted to show people his
techniques, his special style,
his style. And, but
but recording with his back to everybody, recording into the corner of the wall.
He was quite cagey about his Zimmerman or whatever his name was.
Yeah.
He didn't really want to tell people about him too much.
No, that's right.
He probably quite enjoyed the notoriety of this kind of the myth and stuff. And
exactly.
I don't know.
So we talked a little bit about why he might have done that with the guitar, but one of the other kind of things that he does a lot is we hear these turnarounds, the blues turnarounds, and often uses the intro to a song. Maybe you could just play us a little little.
Oh, that little
turnaround so people can visualise or hear what I'm saying. Just a classic.
So that kind of thing.
And I don't know how widespread that was before Robert Johnson, but it features a lot in his songs, and that's usually the turnaround at the end of your 12 bars.
Yeah.
Yep. But he's often leading his songs. The introduction to the songs often feature those turnarounds, and I don't know how much of that actually was commonplace before then. Do you think that they would have influenced a lot of later blues and rock? Those sort of turnarounds?
Well, the fact that it's so familiar, like you say, it almost seems like a cliche now.
Yeah.
But then you hear him do it, and you go, well, that just feels really natural and alive, and and you hear somebody else do it, and it's just so dead.
Yeah.
So I guess that comes back to that for me, that kind of that what versus how, because it's that was something that maybe other people were doing something similar.
Yeah.
That kind of chromatic kind of walking down from the flat 7 down to the 5.
So that's what's going on there. So we're going from the flat 7. So on the key of, let's say we're in the key of A, you're starting on the, and it's a chromatic walk down from the flat 7, I guess, to the 6.
Yeah,
to the 5th.
From the flat 7 down to the 6 to the sharp 5 to the 5. And everyone's done it because it's a sort of a great sound.
Yeah.
But even that kind of blues shuffle, it's kind of I don't know. I kind of think that it's if he actually was one of the first people to kind of do that and record that, I just feel like it's kind of almost like the beginning of rock and roll, that kind of that, the crunch of that kind of that.
Totally.
That fifth, you put that in a slightly overdriven amp, and those notes kind of crunch up against each other, and that's kind of I don't know, you got Chuck Berry or something, and
that's right. That. Yeah, so I did, another thing I read on, online about Robert Johnson, and I think there's just so much speculation and so much conjecture, and there's been a lot of books written, a few documentaries, and probably because he died so young. He was in that 27. It was probably the first member of the 27 Club. He died at 27. But maybe that's why there's so much fascination around him, is just because there's so much mystery. We don't know a lot. We know enough, but there's all these questions that sort of remain unanswered. And
it'd be interesting if he was still alive. When they. Skip James was still alive in the 60s, and suddenly they're come and re-record, because he did a recording earlier than Johnson actually.
Yeah.
In 30 something, and then in the 60s they got him back and re-recorded him, and he had some success then, but I guess you'll never really know. It's easy to have a myth about a Hendrix or a Jim Morrison. We never really kind of got old and boring. So
yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other, things that's obviously famous with blues music is the call and response technique, and it's a pretty central element of Johnson's style. He's creating a lot of dialogue between his voice and the guitar, which you'd think of B.B. King, right? Classic guy who will sing a line, play the guitar. And I famously heard him say once he can't play and sing at the same time. That's why he does it.
Yeah.
Which is like me. But
he is singing when he's playing the guitar. He's singing. And when he's singing.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing.
So that's that call and response between the voice and the guitar, or a guitar lick and a guitar lick. I know that Johnson was one of the early pioneers of actually making the guitar a bit more of a forefront of the whole sound, and a bit of a focus on the sound of the guitar, in a solo kind of way, rather than just the vocals and guitar as a bit of a backing. This is all, I'm not trying to be the truth guy here, by the way. You know, this is just what I've read. I'm no expert, but, you know, just putting out there some thoughts and theories just around that. But, you know, call and response, how important is that in blues or in music?
Well, I guess, I don't know, if you think about roots, then, you know, I mean, that's got like its roots in like if you listen to African music, you know, there's a really strong element from various different African countries. There's a really strong like sort of lead vocal and sort of, you know, call, and then the response of the other singers, you know, sort of back and forth, and this hypnotic kind of quality, and then and the roots of the blues and the kind of like in slavery with the kind of like the field hollers and the sort of work songs, you know, that was, you know, that's how they got through the day.
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
but it was back and forth, and you really hear in his playing, and I mean, and then it's gone into jazz too. It's just you know, it's a really sort of strong sort of an effective kind of like device, but it seems to be really, really part of it, right? And then with him, it's really, I love the way that sometimes he might answer his voice with like some chords up, like little rhythmic sort of chords up high, rhythmic thing, or sometimes it might just be like a little slid note.
Yeah.
And just an answer, you know? And so the fluidity of like his, and the beauty of his guitar playing is that it never really settles into anything. It's never like you say, like a kind of just a bed of rhythm that he's singing over, and then a solo. Yeah, it's just back and forth. It
is back and forth, and it can be all over the show. And there's, you know, it's in a way it's quite unstructured. You know, it doesn't follow the same pattern every time.
Well, it's not formulaic. Like each song is his own thing, you know, and it's like
And it's sort of amazing to think this is, you know, this genre, country blues. I've always kind of in my mind pictured it as being sort of pre a lot of other music, because it is very simple in its form, you know, guitar and a vocalist. But really, you know, this is running parallel to, you know, in the cities you've got a lot of big jazz and swing and, you know, going on in the 1920s.
1936 and 1938, or
by
totally.
then, you know, so this is very much a country, you know, very isolated kind of music that's evolved, while all this major developments in music are also happening all around it, but don't seem to be influencing it that much, you know, perhaps a little bit, but I don't know.
No, I reckon he would apparently, like one of his, like, I can't remember, one of his friends from the time was saying that he used to be able to play anything, like he would be able to sort of hear, he would listen to the radio and he'd hear it, and so he would play ragtime, or like Jewish music or a polka or whatever. Like he was just like a street musician.
Yeah, who's so accomplished.
And he would take requests and he'd be able to play anything. So like, I don't know, it's not like you can hear elements of that, but it's kind of like he obviously was listening to early jazz and stuff like that, and maybe some of those little chromatic things like got nixed by, you know, sort of like assimilated from that. I don't know. Yeah.
It's and just to think, you know, the guys, if you're there and you're playing on the street every day, you're playing all night, you've been practicing for years, the time in the saddle, the hours that you've put into your guitar playing is unlike anything that is very achievable to do in the modern era. I think it's quite difficult to just be so singularly focused on something for mastery. I don't know. I mean, that's it.
There's also a real honesty too, right? Like, I mean, I've done a fair bit of busking, not for a little while, but you know, like there's something like super honest. There's this great jazz trumpeter, Dave Douglas. He was saying that he would encourage like any kind of musician to actually make busking part of their practice, because you're there on the street, people have got their mission, they're walking past you, and you have to do something that connects with them and stops them in their tracks.
That's exactly
to listen to you, and then stops them enough that they reach in their pocket and give
in
you
the
money.
case of these guys, that's how they're going to make a living. That's how they're going to put food, you know, on the table and a roof over their head and your bottle of whiskey aside for the night. And you know, they talk about people literally stopping and weeping hearing Robert Johnson playing, you know, and I'm sure a number of other musicians. But you know, that's playing, you know, busking on the street corner. You know, you're doing that to survive, right? And so you've got to be good, and you've got to have stuff that creates emotion in people. Here's Crossroads Blues, which is the opening track, made famous, of course, by Cream, recording the Crossroads.
I went to the crossroads, fell down on my knees.
You can hear that little bit of rhythmic playing that he just played. That was where I get that kind of that piano, that little bit of a piano vibe from. I'll just see if we can pull that up again.
Yeah, right.
You hear that? Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking with that kind of that sound is just. I don't normally associate that with most of the acoustic guitar playing I hear these days. It's really unusual, but that's obviously that's probably his most famous tune because it really leans into that myth about going down to the crossroads and selling your soul to the devil, right? And it was also covered by Cream, Crossroads, very influential on a lot of artists. It's quite haunting, and it's sort of a bit of a sense of desperation, and there's there's all this tension with the slide work and that bit of rhythmic intensity. What sort of stands out to you? Anything in particular?
Is that kind of like the elements of that kind of straight over the swung thing? Kind of I can kind of feel both in there.
Yeah.
It's quite straight, but there's underlying, there's kind of some kind of sort of swing feel, so it's that kind of lovely kind of tension. But even that rhythmic sort of answer to his voice is it's quite sort of dense and doesn't end where you expect it's going to.
No, that's right. Stuff pops up where you're not really expecting, like the rhythmic parts just pop up out of nowhere after the slide. But sometimes there might just be light in the background, but then they're very intensely in the foreground. It's pretty influential song, I'd say, from probably his most influential song, I would have thought. Another one of the tracks that we were going to have a little listen to was Hellhound on My Trail, which really dives into that emotional kind of feeling of you're being chased by, I don't know, a lynch mob or the police, and this was a very real thing that people lived with in America in the 1920s and the 1930s. If somebody didn't like you, your life could be on the line, and you could be running. You could have people out to get you, and that's kind of there's a hound is on your trail. That's what's going on in the song lyrically. It's a dark sort of foreboding song, and he's got falsetto going on, and the slide guitar creating a haunting effect. Let's have a quick listen.
I got to keep moving, I got to keep moving. Blood falling down like hail, blood falling down like hail. Blood falling down like hail, blood falling down like hail.
So not like nothing spectacular standing out in the it's not like there's some sort of crazy stuff going on, but it's the voice there is very
that was what struck me was his voice, just how all those little kind of inflections and bends, and just like it's just words, because you listen to it and it's just soulful, right?
Yeah.
They call it gets you.
I read it as microtonality, something with somewhere the microtonality of his voice. There's all this tonal stuff going on in his voice. So the haunting lyrics, the rhythmic guitar just kind of enforcing that in the background. There's a lot of emotional weight behind that song. Another track here, which I didn't put on the notes, but I'm going to play, and it's called If I Had Possession Over Judgment Day, but really it's a reworking of a song called Rolling and Tumbling. Again, another Cream song. A lot going on in terms of the famous slide work in it.
If I had possession over Judgment Day,
the song Rolling and Tumbling.
Any woman I'm loving wouldn't have no right to break.
And I think he sings the Rolling and Tumbling part in a little bit. That also became a bit of a blueprint for Travelling Riverside Blues, which Led Zeppelin covered. But yeah, very classic, very intense slide, rhythmic slide playing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful kind of, but it's also just a beautiful riff, right? If you think about,
yeah,
like years later, you think about the Stones or Led Zeppelin or whatever. They were kind of trying to find something that would sort of connect like that. I mean, it's
and translate into electric music. Yeah. Great track. Rambling on My Mind, again a song that's been famously covered. Personal song capturing themes of heartbreak and longing, and I've got here in my notes, unrequited love, and almost sort of trance-like quality.
I got rambling on my mind. I got rambling all on my mind. Hate to leave my baby, but you treat me so unkind.
It's that blues turnaround. That's, again, classic, the blues shuffle. Obviously a lot of emotional and intensity in there. And I think if I can just skip a little bit later in the song, I think there might be some elements of some solo work as the song sort of outros.
I got me thing on my mind.
That's pretty cool, huh?
I got me things all on my mind. I got to leave my baby, but she treats me so unkind.
Nice, beautiful, like slide work, like
just
there. And sometimes it's like with his voice, like moaning with his kind of vocal, and then other times it's kind of like
it's kind of the
beautiful
response.
like response,
Yeah,
it's just like I was saying before, it's just kind of like seamless, isn't it? It just doesn't,
Yeah, it's really, like I said, it really gets under your skin when you've been listening to it a lot. I've been listening to it a lot with headphones on, really intensely, and I think I was saying to you earlier that listening to it a lot as I'm falling asleep at night. I've been doing that a bit lately, just try and experience the music in a slightly different way. And you get this really lucid kind of half awake, half asleep realizations with music, and I've had those with this album, like really amazing intensity that you get when you kind of, from a lot of these songs, listening to them over and over again, compared to when I was, younger and not really appreciating what was going on here.
I relate to that because, I don't know, when I was like I was at jazz school and I was like, it's purist, so like, it's only the blues, that's nice, but it's like these 3 chords and they all do the same thing anyway. And then you realise like it's like what they are doing with those materials is just like. You can keep on kind of going back into it and sort of like it's almost just like going to church, just like trying to imbibe some of that kind of that vibe, right? Yeah,
so much versatility out of such a limit, such a small range of material in terms of 3 chords and that they're kind of working with. And lastly, Come On In My Kitchen. It's a bit of a sexy song, I think. He's a bit of a ladies' man, my understanding. That's what got him in trouble in the end. You can hear that. That's a very kind of sexy, warm.
Yes.
Enjoying that. You better come on in my kitchen. First, ought to be raining outdoors.
This is a beautiful little bit of slide work there, right? And his slide playing, he's actually playing almost in unison, right, with his voice in the opening part of that track. But just those little inflections that I think were just so unique that you wouldn't have heard a lot of out of earlier blues music. Just the little bits and pieces that all sort of come together to make.
It's kind of a certain kind of, although that, not that it's kind of like really kind of prissy or kind of like or in any way, but it's still got like all that kind of like rawness and soul. But there's like a refinement to
a delicacy,
like him, and like a dynamic.
Yeah,
that you sort of listen to other great like blues singers and guitarists. If you listen to Son House or something.
Well, that's right. That was one of the ones I was going to reference.
It's so great and so raw, but then he's like
There's a great clip of
restraint or something that's like actually lifts it.
There's a great clip of Son House in the '60s. He'd gone missing, hadn't played guitar for 16 years. They found him. They brought him up to record this album. He's obviously. I think he looks like a full-blown alcoholic at this point. He's very slurred, very, and I think you can, and this song in particular, Death Letter Blues, or Death Letter by Son House, you can kind of hear the slurring, but the guitar work it's ferocious, but it's quite, it's the same pattern repeated. A little bit of inflection there, but when you can see the video of him actually playing this, and I think it doesn't quite have the same delicacy that you get out of Robert Johnson stuff.
Yeah. I guess like you said, like like you keep kind of thinking of the piano with Robert Johnson. Like one of his contemporaries was saying like he was able to make the guitar, not just in the tone but in terms of his sort of approach.
Yeah.
Like he didn't have like. A sort of a left hand and a right hand, but he was able to have, he had that like sort of do something in the low range, then do something really up high, and then do something in the middle, and it was kind of like a, he never kind of like really sat in one sort of place. Yeah. He was able to range, quite, like dynamic range and sort of,
it's very interesting in is it Lomax, was it John? Alan Lomax was the son with the father was...
I can't remember.
So Lomax was this guy, incredible story. He went around, I think for decades, field recording musicians, folk music, world music, but a lot of interviews and recordings in the 1930s and 40s, which are now form Library of Congress archives. And there's a recording of Muddy Waters, which we'll talk a little bit about next week. 1941, and Muddy Waters playing some music, and he's interviewing Muddy Waters, and Lomax doesn't know about Robert Johnson. And I think Muddy Waters mentions him, and he says, "This Robert Johnson, he's a good guitar player." And he says to Muddy Waters, he says, "Was Son House a good guitar? Who's better out of the two? Is he a better player than Son House?" And Muddy Waters sort of says, "Oh, they're about equal. They're both really good." Yeah. And I think there's probably, the Son House that we hear in the 1960s is probably quite different to the Son House of the 1920s. Not having played guitar for 16 years, and not having his youth and probably years of punishing his body behind him.
I guess like there's with Robert Johnson, like he was recorded seems like at his prime. Yeah, when he was just like,
and that's it. And then you've got nothing
a young
else
man
to kind of,
playing all the time.
Nothing
like
more to
fresh.
Degrade the catalogue, right?
Yeah.
So there seems to be some sort of truism. All that early music's often the best, right? So Ike Zimmerman, I've got the name here. Ike Zimmerman was the guy who you were right. So not Bob Dylan Zimmerman. But his work has really, had this amazing legacy and been a blueprint for so much stuff. We've named it all off. I mean, it's. I think Rolling Stones put it, number 10 in the most influential albums of all time. Whatever, it's right up there. Is the point. And with this, do you think that's justified at being that influential?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you just gotta. Is it, like, I mean, personally, like, I can keep on going back to those recordings, and they don't sound like some sort of dusty kind of like history exercise of going, I better go check out the old guy. It's just kind of like I had it on the car going here, and it just feels really kind of alive, kind of now. Yeah, and just the fact, I don't know, when I was just putting some things on YouTube and just thousands and thousands of kind of people just trying to
trying to replicate.
Trying to look at, like, play his music and learn his music and figure out what he's doing. And, you know, like, if you think about, like, nearly, like, all the kind of the artists have come between him and now, and people are still wanting to go back and...
Yeah, that's exactly
you know, it's
right.
kind of like, well, there's something there that is more than just, you know, just like what he did. It's kind of just like something indefinable about somebody like that.
Yeah, it's look, I really encourage you, if you're a fan of the guitar, of blues music, of rock and roll, to really go back and check out and spend a bit of time letting some of this music get into you and kind of assimilate with it, and try and hear it with fresh ears, and as if you've not heard all the music that's come since, which is pretty impossible to do. But try and imagine that that's kind of the first time you're hearing something like that, and you can get a really amazing appreciation for the path that's been forged out of this music. So I think we're going to wrap that up there. So I'd like to big thank you to David for coming along today and helping talk about this. That was Robert Johnson's King of the Delta Blues Singers from 1961, proudly supplied by onvinyl.co.nz. Thanks for checking out In the Groove, and stay tuned till next time.